before Zeus hurled his first bolt of lightning, before Hera schemed from her golden throne, before Hades ruled the dead, and before Poseidon stirred the restless seas. There was another king, older, darker, and far more terrible than the ones who came after. His name was Kronos. In the shadowed dawn of creation, before sky and earth had fully parted, Kronos was born, not into light, but into the groaning body of Gaia, the earth, and beneath the unblinking gaze of Uranus, the sky. He was their child, the blood of Titans coursing through his veins, carrying within him both the power to give life and the power to destroy it. Yet that power was not a gift, it was a curse. The world then was not yet a place of men or language. It was a wilderness of primal forces, oceans boiling, mountains trembling, winds screaming through the dark. Uranus, vast and endless, lay forever upon Gaia, pressing his sky against her soil. He feared what she might bring forth, for every child she birthed carried a spark of divine might, and perhaps a threat. One by one, as they emerged, the 12 Titans, the one-eyed Cyclopes, the 100-handed Hecatoncheires, Uranus forced them back into the womb of the earth, burying them alive in darkness. Each time he did, Gaia shuddered with agony. Her pain turned to anger, her anger to hatred, and from that hatred was born resolve. If she could not fight the sky, she would create something that could. From the bones of the earth, from metal buried deep within her body, Gaia forged a blade, a sickle of adamant, unbreakable, unyielding, sharp enough to cut even divine flesh. Then she called to her children, "Who among you dares to rise against your father?" One by one, the Titans recoiled. None dared to defy the heavens. None but the youngest, Kronos. Ambitious, calculating, and hungry for power, Kronos stepped forward. He did not tremble when Gaia placed the sickle in his hands. To him, this was not rebellion, it was opportunity. His eyes gleamed, not with fear, but with something colder, anticipation. He was ready to do what none of his siblings could. That night, when Uranus descended once more to lie with Gaia, the earth herself conspired against him. From the shadows, Kronos crouched, waiting, and as Gaia gave the signal, he struck. The sickle flashed a silver arc across the void, and the first scream of pain tore through the cosmos. With one merciless stroke, Kronos castrated his father, cutting away the very source of his dominion. From the blood that fell upon the earth rose new beings, the Uranus, spirits of vengeance, the giants, born of fury. And from the foam that formed where Uranus's flesh struck the sea, came Aphrodite, goddess of love. Even in mutilation, creation followed. But as Uranus faded, he spoke a curse that would outlast the stars. "You will suffer what you have done to me. Your own son will rise against you, as you have risen against me." It was not merely a threat, it was prophecy, a truth bound to the fabric of existence itself. And from that moment onward, Kronos was no longer free. He had chained himself to a cycle older than time, the endless rhythm of rebellion and ruin. With Uranus gone, Kronos released his imprisoned siblings and claimed the throne of the heavens. The Titans hailed him as their liberator, their new king. But beneath their reverence was unease. They had seen what Kronos was capable of, and they knew what it meant to serve one who had slain his own father. For a time, Kronos ruled wisely. The world calmed. Rivers found their courses, mountains steadied, and the first age of order dawned. The Greeks would later call it the Golden Age, an age when mortals lived in harmony, when the earth yielded fruit without labor, when no one grew old or went hungry. Peace, however, can be as deceptive as silence before a storm. Kronos, the liberator, became Kronos, the tyrant. Though he ruled over abundance, his heart was plagued by fear. For every sound of laughter, every cry of a newborn, every whisper of the wind seemed to carry the echo of his father's curse. Your son will overthrow you. In that fear, his greatness curdled. He became obsessed with control, not over land or sky, but over the future itself. The same sickle that once cut the heavens became a farmer's tool, a symbol of harvest and plenty. Yet to those who looked closer, it was still a weapon, a reminder that every harvest ends with something being cut down, life and death bound by one motion of the blade. Artists of the ancient world rarely drew Kronos with a face. He was instead the shape of a power, a figure holding a curved blade, neither hero nor monster, but something between. As the centuries passed, his image fused with the Roman Saturn, and the sickle became the scythe of time. The god of harvest turned into the father of decay, father time, devourer of all things. Centuries later, the Spanish painter Francisco Goya would give that fear a face. In his haunting work, Saturn devouring his son, Kronos appears as a gaunt, desperate figure, eyes bulging, mouth dripping with horror. It is not just a god he paints, but the very madness of power consumed by paranoia, the god who devoured his future to escape his fate. Even in his triumph, Kronos could not escape the prophecy that echoed through his soul. For every kingdom built upon rebellion must in time face rebellion again. He had severed his father to rule, and in doing so, severed the world into two truths. Every creation carries destruction, and every birth a death yet to come. The sky was silent now, but the earth still remembered. Deep within Gaia's womb, the children of Kronos waited to be born. The curse of Uranus had not vanished. It had only taken root, and soon the bloodline of Titans would turn upon itself once more. Before the first thunderbolt, before even the word time had meaning, Kronos had already forged his prison, not of chains or stone, but of inevitability. He was the king of the Titans, but more than that, he was the first prisoner of destiny. And as the sickle gleamed in his hand, it seemed to whisper the same truth that would echo through eternity. Everything that is born must one day be devoured. The reign of Kronos began not with celebration, but with silence, the kind of silence that comes after a wound has been inflicted on the world itself. The heavens bled, and the earth drank that blood. The Titans emerged into light for the first time, blinking as if newly born, yet already ancient. Above them, the sky was no longer infinite. It bore the invisible scar of its severing. Kronos stood at the center of it all, the sickle still in his hand, glistening faintly with his father's blood. That blade would never dull, for it was forged from the bones of Gaia and baptized in the flesh of Uranus. It had become more than a weapon. It was a covenant, a promise that no power would last forever. The Titans built their dominion upon that promise. The brothers and sisters of Kronos spread across the young cosmos, shaping it with their immense, raw divinity. Oceanus encircled the world with an endless river. Hyperion lit the heavens with fire. Themis carved justice from chaos. And Mnemosyne, memory herself, gave order to thought. But all of them, no matter how vast their domains, bent the knee to Kronos, the Titan king, who had dared to cut the sky. He was not the strongest among them, nor the wisest, but he was the one who had acted. The others had hesitated. He had wielded the sickle. In that act lay his authority, not divine right, but divine audacity. He ruled by the memory of his courage and by the fear that it might be turned upon them next. Gaia watched from the depths of the world, proud yet uneasy. She had wished to end Uranus's tyranny, not to replace one cruelty with another. But Kronos, shaped by rebellion, understood only conquest. He wore the crown his mother had given him and the paranoia his father had cursed him with. In his heart, the two became one. And so, the cosmos entered a new rhythm, not the stillness of creation, but the uneasy pulse of power and fear. For the first time, there was hierarchy among the gods. There was law, and beneath that law, dread. From his throne at the heart of Mount Arthries, Kronos looked out over the newborn world. The heavens above him shimmered faintly, as if remembering the pain of their severing. The earth beneath him was fertile, humming with the power of Gaia's renewal. The rivers sparkled like veins of living silver. It was a paradise born from violence, and Kronos saw it as his to command. He took his sister, Rhea, as his queen, she of the gentle face and steady voice, the embodiment of nurture and motherhood. Together they ruled over the first age of order. Under Cronus's rule, the mortals who came after would know abundance beyond imagining. Crops grew without toil, rivers yielded fish in endless supply. The seasons did not yet exist, and death came softly like sleep. It was an age without hunger, war, or aging. The poets of Greece would one day sing of this time and call it the Golden Age. They would remember it as an era of equality, where kings and servants were one, where no man was slave, and the world itself was young. But the poets did not see what lay beneath that perfection, the shadow that stretched from the throne of Kronos to the ends of the earth. For the king who ruled paradise was haunted by the sound of his father's dying curse. At night, when the stars flickered like distant eyes, Kronos would hear it in the wind. Your child will destroy you. And in his dreams he saw a face, not yet born, not yet real, but destined. The face of his son, rising against him. He awoke from those dreams in fury, the sickle trembling in his grasp. He told himself it was foolish superstition, a ghost of his father's voice lingering in his mind. But gods are creatures of symbols, and symbols never die. As time flowed, though time itself was not yet personified, the weight of prophecy grew heavy upon him. Each time Rhea's womb swelled with life, Kronos felt the cycle turning. He could almost hear it, like a grinding wheel. What if one of those unborn hearts carried the spark that would undo him? The sickle, once an emblem of triumph, became an emblem of dread. Kronos began to see it not as the key to power, but as a reminder of loss. The more he ruled, the more he realized that every beginning already contained its ending. In his palace, sculpted from white stone and veined with gold, Kronos sat surrounded by his siblings, gods of fire, of rivers, of knowledge and justice, yet he trusted none of them. He ruled with quiet terror, demanding obedience, fearing betrayal. The Titans had been freed from Uranus as cruelty, only to find themselves bound again, this time by the paranoia of their own brother. To keep order, Kronos established the first laws of the cosmos, decrees written not in words but in consequence. The stars would follow fixed paths across the sky. The earth would bear fruit in cycles. The moon would wax and wane. Everything that grew must one day wither. This was his dominion, the balance of giving and taking, of creation and harvest. In forging this cosmic rhythm, Kronos unknowingly set into motion the very principle that would define him for eternity, the inevitability of decay. He who once cut the heavens had now become the custodian of time's first motion. Each sunrise, each sunset, each heartbeat of the world echoed the pulse of his own fear. And deep within Gaia, where her heartbeat was the molten core of the earth, she sighed. Her son had taken her gift, the sickle, the rebellion, and turned it into a crown of dread. The prophecy was already alive, though neither of them yet knew it. For while Kronos tried to master the cosmos was already preparing its answer. Somewhere, beyond his knowing, Rhea would bear children, and with each birth, the cycle would tighten, drawing closer to its fulfillment. The sickle of earth had spilled the blood of the sky. Now, the sky's curse would spill the blood of the earth's son. The heavens, once silent, began to tremble again, faintly, like a distant storm gathering beyond sight. And though Kronos did not yet hear it, the first echo of thunder had already been born. The reign of Kronos unfolded like a slow and perfect dream. For the first time since creation's chaos, the heavens did not scream, and the earth no longer groaned beneath the weight of pain. Rivers carved gentle paths, winds softened to lullabies, and the seasons stood still in eternal spring. It was said that even the stars moved more slowly during this age, as if reluctant to disturb the peace. Mortals, those fragile reflections of divine breath, lived freely upon the land. They did not need to hunt nor toil. The earth provided of its own will. Trees bowed beneath the weight of fruit, and grain rose from the soil unbidden. No one aged, no one starved, and when death came, it arrived not as violence, but as a fading light, the closing of eyes to a music only the soul could hear. This was Elysium before Elysium, the first paradise, and at its center sat the Titan King, his scythe resting at his side, gleaming faintly like a reminder of forgotten blood. To the mortals, he was a benevolent ruler, a god of harvest and bounty. They called to him with offerings of honey and fresh bread, not out of fear, but reverence. To them, Kronos was not the devourer of life, but the giver of it. Yet to the gods who knew him, he was something else. From his throne of marble and shadow, Kronos ruled with a calm that felt too perfect, too measured the silence of a blade just before it falls. His siblings still served him, but none dared to look him directly in the eyes, for in his gaze they saw what Uranus had once seen, suspicion as vast as the sky itself. Rhea, his queen, sat beside him, radiant and sorrowful. She saw what others did not, the way his hands clenched when he heard of another prophecy whispered by the oracles of Gaia. For even the earth, his mother, seemed to murmur against him now. The whispers grew with every birth. Each new life that Rhea carried was a new tremor in Kronos' soul. The curse of Uranus, once a distant echo, now lived in his heartbeat. When Rhea bore their first child, a daughter named Hestia, Kronos looked upon her and felt the faint warmth of love, but behind it, terror. In her small, glowing face, he saw not innocence but destiny. The prophecy did not say which son would destroy him. It said only a child. And so, the moment Rhea turned her eyes away, Kronos took the infant into his hands and swallowed her whole. Rhea screamed a cry that shook the marble halls of Mount Othrys, but it was too late. The sound of it echoed through the corridors like wind through a tomb. Kronos sat in silence, his throat burning with divine fire. Inside him, the essence of his daughter merged with his own, imprisoned in the endless dark. He told himself it was mercy. He told himself it was necessary. Yet when Rhea bore her second child, Demeter, the same horror returned. Again he devoured the newborn, though Rhea begged him to stop. Then came Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, each taken from their mother's arms and swallowed into the abyss of their father's stomach. Rhea's grief became a hollow that no light could fill. She walked the halls like a ghost, her voice fading to silence. The palace that had once echoed with laughter now rang only with the distant hum of Kronos' paranoia. The Golden Age continued for mortals, but among the gods, the air grew heavy, stagnant, poisoned by fear. Kronos told himself that he was saving the cosmos, that by consuming his children, he was consuming his fate. But in truth, every act of consumption only fed the prophecy. Every swallowed child was a spark of divine life that would one day return. Inside him, the next generation of gods stirred a kingdom waiting to be born from his own undoing. There were times when Kronos thought he heard them faintly, from within himself, voices whispering, hearts beating. Perhaps it was imagination, or perhaps the divine cannot ever truly die, even inside the belly of time. Meanwhile, in the mortal world below, the festival of Cronia was born, a day when slaves dined as equals with their masters, when the order of things was turned upside down. It was a reflection of the old world under Kronos, when all lived in equality. The mortals celebrated him joyfully, unaware that the god they honored sat in the heavens gnawed by madness. For the longer he ruled, the more the boundary blurred between benevolence and tyranny. His eyes, once golden, dimmed to bronze. His laughter, once steady, began to crack. Even his shadow stretched longer, darker, as though it was growing into something larger than he could contain. And in the quiet hours, Rhea's heart broke anew. She was not only a mother without children, she was the wife of a god devoured by fear. When she gazed upon him, she saw a figure both tragic and monstrous, a being who had freed the Titans from their father's cruelty only to become a prison greater than the one he destroyed. She turned her prayers to Gaia, whispering her grief into the earth as her mother once had. And from that grief, a plan began to form, a secret rebellion of the womb. When Rhea conceived once more, she did not tell Kronos. The pain of her earlier losses had hardened her into resolve. This time, she would not let her child be taken. This time, she would break the cycle that had devoured gods and mortals alike. Gaia, ever the silent witness of divine cruelty, answered, "Hide this child," she said. "Hide him far from the eyes of your husband, for his destiny is greater than the fear that rules your king." And so it was. When the time came, Rhea's labor began, not in the halls of Mount Othrys, but in secret, in a cave upon the island of Crete, hidden beneath the rustling leaves of Mount Ida. The earth trembled softly as the child drew his first breath. A cry rang out, not of sorrow, but of promise. In that moment, thunder rolled far away across the sky. Rhea looked upon her son, the sixth and final child of Kronos, and named him Zeus. Zeus's first lullaby was the clatter of bronze upon bronze, in the cave on Mount Ida, where stalactites dripped like the teeth of sleeping giants. Armored youths danced their war dance, the curates, guardians, who masked a baby's cry by beating shields with spears. Outside, the island of Crete breathed in incense and salt wind. Inside, the newborn god drank from the milk of Amalthea, the gentle goat whose horns gleamed like small crescents of moon. Rhea, the mother who had lost 5 children to the abyss of their father, pressed her lips to her son's forehead and felt, for the first time in an age, the fragile warmth of hope. But hope is not safety. Hope is a secret that must be fed, hidden, and taught to grow in the dark. Kronos asked where his child was, as he always did. His voice was mild, but the air shivered with the memory of swallowed names. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. Rhea returned to him with dutiful silence, her eyes lowered, her arms cradling a weight wrapped tight in linen. He did not look closely. Tyrants look away when they devour what they fear. He opened his mouth, and the bundle slid into the black. Only when the weight struck bottom did the deception reveal itself, not to him, but to fate. He had swallowed a stone, swaddled like an infant, cold, perfect, merciless. The cruelest jest of prophecy is not that it is inevitable, but that it is accomplished by the smallest things. In the cave, Zeus grew like a flame sheltered in a cupped hand. He learned the language of wind in the pines, the patience of stone, the swiftness of mountain goats. He learned to listen to the heartbeat of the earth, to the laughter of nymphs, to the rhythm of the curate's iron chorus. He learned the shapes of silence, the silence of fear, the silence of watchfulness, and the strange, tender silence that exists between a mother and a child who cannot be seen together. When he was old enough to stand within the cave's mouth and look out upon the world, he saw ships like white leaves and clouds like slow herds. He asked the mountain who he was. The mountain answered with an echo that was not an echo. You are the answer to a blade. Zeus descended from the mountain, wrapped not in linen but in cunning. He would not take his father's throne by sheer strength. Raw power was the language of Titan hands. His rebellion would speak a subtler tongue, the tongue of Metis, goddess of craft and counsel, whose wisdom was a river that found every hidden channel in stone. She came to him in twilight, her eyes bright with plans. Greatness that charges headlong is easy to chain, she said. Greatness that waits is impossible to seize. So Zeus waited. He went to the halls of Athres, not as a rival, but as a stranger, a quiet servant beneath a hood of shadow. In the banquet chambers, where Titans lifted cups heavy as anvils, he poured wine with a steady hand and a bowed head. Kronos never looked directly at him. The king of dread does not scrutinize those he deems beneath fear. Night after night, Zeus learned the pulse of the court, who spoke first, who laughed too loudly, who kept one hand always near a blade. He learned his father's habits, the hour his voice softened, the moment his eyes drifted to the door where Rhea would once have entered with an infant. Metis brewed a draught that borrowed its sharpness from the very sickle that had cut the sky, herbs of purge and truth. Bitterness steeped in inevitability. Into the wine it went, invisible, inevitable. Zeus raised the cup, knelt, and offered it to the mouth that had been a grave for gods. Kronos drank. He smiled. The room echoed with mirth that had no humor. The mask of the golden age shone as bright as ever. Then the old king's face darkened, not with rage, but with a convulsion he could not command. His body, which had made prisons of other bodies, became a prison he could not master. He lurched. The cup fell and rang like a bell tolling over a battlefield not yet named. The silence in the hall fractured. Zeus did not move. He was the still point at the center of a turning world. The first to return was Hestia, warm as the center of a home. She came up like a flame reigniting in a cold hearth, whole and radiant, stepping from darkness as if from sleep. Then Demeter, green at the edges, the scent of new grain clinging to her. Hera, crowned already by her own will. Hades, whose eyes held the cool of caverns never known to light. And Poseidon, dripping the sea from his shoulders as though he had been swimming in the night. They did not rise as infants, but as gods fully formed, their essences preserved by the paradox of divinity. What is devoured cannot be digested if it is eternal. The hall, once marble and shadow, flared with the sudden reality of a new order. Siblings who had never met embraced like survivors of the same shipwreck. Rhea stood at the threshold and wept, the long silence in her life breaking like a drought. Kronos staggered, bewildered by the returning future. The prophecy he had swallowed had climbed back up his throat and stood before him wearing faces. he roared and reached for the sickle. But the sickle is faithful only to the first truth it learned, that every strike begins a counterstroke. Zeus raised his hand, and the hall shook with a sound older than music, the promise of thunder. The Titans, sudden in their fear, took up their weapons, but it was too late for halls and feasts and masks. A palace cannot contain a storm, a dynasty cannot outshout an echo. Zeus led his siblings out beneath the open sky, into air that tasted of iron and rain. He called not only to the betrayed, but to the forgotten. Down in the depths, where Gaia had once been wounded by the weight of her own children, the Cyclopes stirred and blinked their single blazing eyes. Long ago, Uranus had driven them into the womb of the earth. Kronos had left them there. They emerged now with grins like cracks in stone, grateful to any hand that pulled them toward light. For freedom, Zeus said. For craft, the Cyclopes answered. They set their anvils upon mountains. They heated furnaces with the breath of volcanoes. Sparks leapt into constellations. From their forges came gifts that were not gifts but destinies hammered into shape. For Zeus, the thunderbolt, a shard of sky taught to obey a hand. For Poseidon, the trident, a tuning fork for oceans. For Hades, the helm of invisibility, woven from night so dense it devoured sight itself. Each weapon was an argument etched into reality. Each argued the same conclusion, that the age had turned. Zeus called also to the hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones whom both sky and sickle had wronged. They rose like mountains, learning to walk. Where a Titan raises one boulder, a hecatoncheire hurls 100. Their laughter was avalanches. Their anger was justice, delayed, and now arriving all at once. Kronos gathered those who still loved his fear more than they loved the world. Atlas, broad as the horizon. Iapetus, father of sharp-minded Prometheus. Hyperion, whose gaze was daybreak sharpened to a spear. They came not as villains, but as the past refusing to release its claim on the present. Between two generations of gods, the air thickened, brightening like metal about to melt. The ground thrummed. Clouds stacked into towers. The sea drew back its skirts. Mortals looked up from gardens that needed no tending and felt a prickle at the base of the neck. The inexplicable knowledge that peace is an interval, not a guarantee. On the heights of Othrys and the slopes of Olympus, the first stones were lifted. The first bolts were called. The first oaths, both brave and terrible, were sworn. Zeus gripped the thunder that was his birthright, not because he was born to it, but because he answered it. Across from him, Kronos tightened his hand upon the sickle that had once released the world and now would try to bind it again. A wind rose, one that remembered the scream of Uranus and the lullaby of the Curetes, and moved through the ranks of gods like a herald. In that wind, the cycle spoke a single sentence, begin again, and so the sky darkened, and so the mountains leaned closer, as if not wanting to miss a word. And so the first thunderbolt fell, not as a shout of triumph, but as the opening syllable of a war of 10 years, whose end none could yet see. The storm of gods had returned, and this time it would not be hidden by bronze on bronze. It would speak in lightning. The war between the Titans and the Olympians raged for 10 years, a decade that felt like the collapse and rebirth of the cosmos itself. The Greeks would later call it the Titanomachy, but to those who lived through it, gods, spirits, and mortals alike, it was not merely a battle. It was a reordering of existence. Every mountain trembled, every ocean boiled, every gust of wind carried ash and thunder. The world was no longer a place of peace or golden harmony. It was a crucible in which the very bones of creation were being melted down and reshaped. At the heart of this storm stood Kronos, the devourer of his children, the first usurper of divine thrones. He was no longer the radiant king of the Golden Age. His skin, once the color of ripened grain, had taken on the dull gleam of bronze. His eyes burned with the weary fury of a god who has seen his own prophecy come true. In his hand he still clutched the sickle of adamant, the same blade that had once cut the sky, but it no longer shone. It had become a symbol of futility, dulled by repetition, worn by the cycles it once commanded. Across from him rose Zeus, no longer a boy hidden in a cave, but a god wrapped in lightning. His siblings stood beside him, their powers intertwined like the roots of a single tree. Poseidon commanding the seas that roared like beasts, Hades cloaked in shadows, so dense that even light seemed afraid to touch him. Hera crowned in stormlight, Demeter weaving life through the ashes, and Hestia, burning quietly at their center, a flame of remembrance. The armies of Kronos were vast Atlas, whose shoulders could bear the world itself. Iapetus, whose rage cracked the ground. Hyperion, a burning spear of daylight. And countless other titans who refused to bend before the children they had once dismissed as lesser. But the Olympians had something new, something the titans had never known: alliance. They fought not as individuals bound by pride, but as a family forged by suffering. The Cyclopes hurled bolts of molten metal from their forges. The Hecatoncheires, with their 100 arms, rained mountains upon the old gods like pebbles. The Titans answered with storms of fire and stone, their roars echoing through the ages. The sound was said to have split the continents and carved valleys that still bear the scars of their war. For 10 years, victory wavered like a coin spinning in air, the outcome undecided, the world holding its breath. Then, in the 10th year, when even the stars seemed to dim from exhaustion, Zeus called upon the last of his thunderbolts. He raised it high, not as a weapon of rage, but as judgment. The bolt tore through the sky, splitting night from day, and struck the throne of Kronos. The impact was so vast that it burned a scar across the heavens. The Milky Way, born from divine fire and falling dust. Kronos fell. The sickle slipped from his grasp, clanging against stone, and shattered into sparks that vanished like dying stars. The Titans cried out as they felt the tide turn, and one by one their power unraveled. Atlas was cast down, condemned to hold the heavens upon his shoulders. The rest, Iapetus, Hyperion, Zeus, Cronus, and the others, were hurled into Tartarus, the deepest abyss beneath the earth, where the Hecatoncheires stood guard with chains of molten iron, and Kronos, the king of the Titans, the father of the gods, was dragged into the darkness he had once imposed upon others. The prophecy was fulfilled, the cycle complete. But in Greek myth, endings are never clean. Even in defeat, Kronos' story splintered into 1,000 echoes. Some say he lies still, bound in the abyss, murmuring to himself in a voice that sounds like the ticking of an unseen clock. Others say he was cast not into Tartarus, but into exile, to the edges of the world, beyond the Western Ocean, where the light fades and time runs slow. There, in a land untouched by mortal eyes, he wanders not as a tyrant, but as a ghost of his former self. The Romans would later call that land the Isles of the Blessed, a paradise where the souls of heroes dwell. And in their telling, Kronos rules again, not in fear, but in peace. The devourer turned gardener, the tyrant turned keeper of eternity. Perhaps, in that vision, the gods tried to redeem what they could not forget. But the Orphic mystics saw another truth. To them, Kronos was not gone, he was transformed. He had become time itself. Not a person, not a god, but the force that consumes all things and spares nothing, not even the divine. The sickle became a scythe, the emblem of the harvest that cuts through life and death alike. And the god who once devoured his children became the father of every ending that would ever be. In that merging of Kronos with Kronos, the Greeks revealed something profound. The terror of power and the terror of time are the same. Both begin with hunger, both end in emptiness. Every empire becomes its own devourer. Every creator becomes the victim of what he made. So when artists painted Kronos, when poets spoke his name, they were not merely telling of a god who ate his children. They were confessing a truth about existence itself, that every birth is the beginning of decline, that every victory plants the seed of its own destruction. The Romans, seeking to soften this truth, turned Kronos into Saturn, the god of abundance and agriculture. His festival, Saturnalia, was one of joy and reversal. Masters served slaves, wealth was shared, laughter replaced law. It was a brief, intoxicating glimpse of the golden age restored. Yet beneath the feast, the old shadow remained, for even celebration is a countdown, even joy measures its own vanishing. And so the story circles back, as all stories do, to where it began. Before Zeus hurled his first thunderbolt, before Kronos raised his sickle, before the sky was wounded and the earth cried out, there was the same rhythm that still beats in every heart, mortal or divine, a rhythm of creation and destruction, of harvest and decay. The poets say that when Kronos fell into Tartarus, he did not scream. He only laughed, a quiet, hollow laugh that sounded like the wind rustling through dry wheat. For in that final moment he understood. He had never ruled the world. He had only ruled the interval between one generation's rise and another's dawn. The gods who defeated him would in turn be defeated. The sky he once severed would one day fall again. The sickle would keep swinging, unseen but inevitable, because Kronos was never just a titan. He was the clock no one could stop. And as the centuries passed, every human hour, every dying empire, every shifting season would whisper his name again, not in fear but in recognition. Time devours all. It always has. It always will.